Hello and welcome. Ukraine and Russia are both claiming the other side wants to blow up the Kakhovka Dam close to Kherson. We are going to talk in this video about what would be the consequences of such a detonation of the blowing of the dam and which side would profit, so you can see and you can judge for yourself, in case it's actually getting blown up, who was the likely culprit. Ukraine is saying its workers in the hydroelectric power plant have prepared it for detonation. They have mined it. This could, in theory, mean that they actually don't mean to blow it up, but that they want to blackmail the Ukrainians of not bombarding the region with artillery, with HIMARS, as it is one of their main crossing points over the Dnieper River, and thus one of the main points for their retreat or for getting resupplies onto their Dnieper bridgehead. Russia itself is saying the Ukrainians want to blow it up, so they are claiming the Ukrainians will blow it up, and accordingly, this is getting now accusations of a potential false flag attack that is in the making. We are not going to talk about false flag attacks. We're going to talk about the consequences of the a potential explosion on the dam, which breaks the dam, and what will be the consequences of this, and who is likely going to profit from that. So who is going to be the one doing it at the various moments of that war. Now, this is a simulation from the Russian Telegram, and you can see the flood wave. The wave goes down. Supposedly, it is expected a 5-meter high wave rolling down the Dnieper south of the dam. That should be more or less like 16 feet. It'll mostly hit the eastern side of the Dnieper, but it'll make the inlets rise. It'll hit the southern parts of Kherson. Kherson itself, big parts of it are so high over the river that they won't be touched. But everything down here, we can see flooding down here. Everything living here, everyone living here in this area will be hit, and obviously all those parts will also be hit. In total, the Ukrainian government says 80 towns and cities are going to be flooded. That should mean hundreds of thousands of homeless people. And of course, a wave in 5 meters height will probably kill thousands, if not tens of thousands, in case it's getting blown up. Another consequence of that would be that the electricity supply for Ukraine will be further weakened. The hydroelectric power plant there is a big producer of electric energy and is one of the remaining power plants that is still supplying Ukraine, which has already faced a drop of 30 to 40% in its output capacity because of the Russian attacks against its power plants all over the country in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Another consequence would be that the Crimean Canal would run dry. This canal is starting right here at the dam, going south onto the Crimean Peninsula, and is there for the main freshwater supply for the Crimean Peninsula. And the last consequence that is significant would be that the Zaporizhzhia power plant in Enerhodar might run out of cooling water, as it's right now being supplied from the reservoir, and should its water fall significantly, then there might be no more possibility to actually pump in cooling water for the 6 reactors there, which in consequence could lead to nuclear meltdowns in actually 6 nuclear reactors. Right now, we need to talk about who would benefit from such an explosion, as we're talking about the negative effects. Now, the dam is supplying the Crimean Canal, which is one of the arguments why Russia wouldn't do this. But at the same time, we need to acknowledge that Ukraine has closed that dam in 2014, cut off the freshwater supply to Crimea, and the people there didn't die of thirst either. In the coming years, Russia was able to supply enough fresh water to supply the population and the military there. The only thing that might cause problems is the agriculture, which is dependent on that water to run. But it is not something that is an unsurmountable problems for the Russians, which would not justify blowing it up. Russia itself, in case it blows it up, it would cover big areas of this region here with mud, with water, and make it more or less unsurpassable. And in case that Russia blows up the dam, it would also, like in case that the dam is blown up, this region would be hard to cross for the Ukrainians over the river, and which would secure the whole area here, which is more or less necessary for the defense of the Crimean Peninsula. As it is close to it, it would be the area where the Ukrainian troop concentrations would build up to reconquer, to liberate Crimea. It is where the Ukrainian artillery would be able to attack the numerous Russian military installations, and it's a lot of it would be in HIMARS range. If you look at this, not quite yet, but HIMARS would be able to shoot further and further down if this area here is getting conquered. So for Russia, this would be a big benefit in certain circumstances. If the Ukrainians manage a breakthrough along the front that is completely collapsing, this might have the chance for the Ukrainians that they just run through, push everything aside, just keep running until they reach the river, and then somehow manage to cross it and get a bridgehead. In a case like this, a complete collapse of the Russian front there, which might lead to the Ukrainians actually using that momentum to cross the river. In a case like this, blowing up the river would make any crossing impossible for the Ukrainians, any usage of that momentum. Another reason, another point where blowing up the dam is highly beneficial to the Russians is once they've withdrawn or once they've been defeated on the right bank of the Dnieper, as this would help them secure that area, as I just said, which is of enormous strategic importance to the Russians and especially to the Crimean Peninsula, which cannot be overstated in its importance itself. So when we see the detonation, the explosion happening in conjunction with a Ukrainian breakthrough, or after a Ukrainian victory in Kherson, or after a full withdrawal from the Russians, or more or less full withdrawal from the Russians, we can see that it's clearly military beneficial to the Russians, and the Ukrainians would have no reason whatsoever to do it. By the way, when it comes to the nuclear power plants, right now I've read rumors from the last hours that the Russians supposedly are evacuating their military from the nuclear power plant, which could then be in some conjunction with this, because obviously if a nuclear meltdown is happening, you might not want to have your soldiers right around it. Even though that's not really like a nuclear bomb, it's still more healthy to have your soldiers at distance in a case like this. Now, when would the Ukrainians profit from it? If you take the pro-Russian point of view, which is that the Ukrainians more or less don't care too much about civilian lives, that's what the pro-Russian voices say to us from the beginning of the war, more or less. That's one of their reasons. You have probably heard about the claims that the Ukrainians were committing genocide in Donbass, etc. If we take that point of view and ignore the civilian suffering from such an explosion of the dam, completely ignore it and just look at the military benefits, then actually blowing up the dam right now, right this very moment, would be highly beneficial for the Ukrainians. Why this? Obviously, a flooding to this degree would make resupplying the Russian forces on the right bank of the river more or less impossible. It would make it more or less impossible for the Russians to withdraw. They would have to leave behind the majority of their equipment. And while they might have some amphibious vehicles, and I emphasize some here, those might have trouble crossing the Dnieper in such a scenario, as well as the current would be far too strong. There would be trees swimming in it, which could sink amphibious vehicles, etc. So the majority of the equipment would stay on this side of the Dnieper, on the Ukrainian held side, and thus would either have to be destroyed by Russian soldiers or would reinforce the Ukrainians afterwards by the measure of capturing that equipment. And this is actually quite significant because the Ukrainian Southern Operational Command is claiming 45 BTGs, Battalion Tactical Groups, are currently in this region. They said Kherson. Now, obviously, Kherson is not just the city, but it's also the oblast, and the oblast is to 2/3 or maybe 75% on the other side of the Dnieper. Troop concentration will clearly be on this side. You don't leave the majority of your troops on the other side of the river if you're in the defensive here. But regardless, this is more or less up to 1/3 of the Russian combat strength that is in existence is in this region. Should the Ukrainians right now blow up the dam, and not care about civilian consequences, about civilian losses of such an explosion. Should they do this right now, they might cut off 30, even 40 battalion tactical groups, and in the consequence of this, either capture their equipment or destroy those groups completely. This would be a strategic victory of proportions far bigger than anything we've seen so far. This would be close to a deciding blow inside of that war when it comes to the weakening of the Russians, while the Ukrainians would gather a lot of strength by shortening their front lines and capturing several brigades worth of equipment. So right now, the Ukrainians would massively benefit from blowing up the dam in this very moment, when we purely look at the military consequences, not at the civilians, which obviously is then up for debate whether the Ukrainians would be willing to do this or not. The pro-Ukrainian side obviously would say the Ukrainians would never do this, while the Russians would do. But in this case, I want to keep outside of this discussion, as I think it's kind of pointless from this point of view. So what I tried to give you and hopefully achieved is giving you a measure to judge, in case we hear that the dam is being blown up, to judge who was it, despite both sides. Despite the fact that we can expect both sides to claim that it was the opposite side having blown it up. If the dam is actually being blown up in the next hours or maybe the next few days, it is more likely to have been by Ukrainian hands somehow, as it would benefit the Ukrainian military highly. If it's blown up in conjunction with a Ukrainian breakthrough or the Russian withdrawal, then we know that there is no point whatsoever for the Ukrainians to do it then. So it must have been the Russians. I hope you find this interesting. I'm interested in your comments in the comment section, whether you think it would actually justify the military benefit, maybe even shortening the war would benefit it for the Ukrainian side to blow up the dam, despite maybe thousands, maybe tens of thousands of civilians and incredible devastation. This should be an interesting topic up for discussion. I'm looking forward to see your comments on this, and this channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by the means you can find in the description. Thank you so much for everyone already supporting the channel. Without you, it wouldn't be possible. You can also support the channel though through likes, telling the algorithm this channel is something interesting by hitting the like button, by commenting, and obviously hitting the subscribe button. And don't forget the bell button so you don't miss future videos. And if you really want to help, you can also recommend the channel to friends and acquaintances to help it grow. That's it from my side. I hope you found it interesting. I'll see you soon, and I'll be back.